mean, tonight's topic is one that we often hear about and talk about, but sustained success, particularly in the rugby arena, can often be quite elusive. So this is why I'm really pleased to announce Mark Griffin as our speaker this evening on strategies for fundraising and sponsorship. I know Mark personally. I know him to be a bright, passionate, and driven individual who brings a unique perspective in that his professional experience over the past 23 years is split evenly between the commercial and nonprofit sectors. So Mark is passionate about connecting stakeholders around collaborative projects that inspire people, that align purpose, and that drive performance to create value for everyone. Currently, Mark is the commercial director with USA Rugby. He engages with corporations who seek value through engaging in a unique rugby experience and contributing to growth. And then notably, formerly, he was the founder and previous CEO of two sports-based social impact programs, Vita Sports Partners and Play Rugby USA. And Mark has experienced and overcome all of the challenges associated with leading an organization from concept to sustainability. And during this time, he mastered skills relative to our topic today, sustainable revenue generation. And I think one of the key things to point out is that notably during his tenure at Play Rugby USA, from 2006 to 2018, Mark raised approximately $10 million during that time. So on that remarkable note, I will turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jen. You got the job. Right, let me bear with me, everybody. I'm just going to pull up the
You're a host, Mark, so you can share your
presentation. Let me share the screen here. Apologies, I'm better at fundraising than I am at Zoom, obviously. Sorry, I've lost the, oh, here we go, Zoom, share screen. I've got everything on my laptop here except the Zoom screen. Oh, here we go. Share screen, done. All right, presentation here. Share. Let me know if you can see that front slide.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay, right. Good. Right. Well, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Jen. Thank you so much for that introduction, and Brian for the invite. When we spoke on this a couple of months ago, actually, probably more now. Everything seems to go so quickly during COVID, doesn't it? I think my young lad who's in the background watching TV, which he's not meant to be doing because he's only 15 months old, but it will keep him quiet for a short while, was only about 8 months old when COVID started. So he's had over 50% of his life, I think, on pretty much various stages of lockdown. So it's been interesting. So this is going to be genuine to that. He's in the background. Apologies if I have to jump away very quickly, but I will endeavour to run through some slides in 20-25 minutes. I'd like to save 50% of the time for questions. Some of you have submitted questions online already. Thank you for that, and I've already been through those. And any others that get submitted during the session, we'll try to consolidate and answer as many of those as we can for the second half of the session. So here's just a quick rundown of what we'll be covering in the session today, and happy for Brian to share this presentation with anybody afterwards that would like to have it. So the first thing is just to provide a little bit of context, because the original request from Brian had been around sponsorship, and that's my current role at USA Rugby. I'm the commercial director, so primarily responsible for engaging corporations in sponsoring and partnering with the union from a commercial perspective. But my past experience, both as obviously a rugby player, club administrator, and as the founder of Play Rugby USA, which when it started out was very much just a small community rugby program, led me to sort of discuss with Brian about, let's broaden the topic a little bit, because sponsorship is a very niche component of the overall objective that we have, which is to try to fuel our passion with dollars so we can grow our rugby programs, whether it be at a rugby club or at a league or a conference level, or even up to the national governing body level. And just to give you some context on that, I listed out a few of the primary methods of raising funds, and this would be relevant at the national governing body level, primarily, especially number 6, obviously digital media and broadcast. But for all of the other 5 areas, all 5 of these areas are very relevant, whether you're at the rugby club level or national governing body level. And just to give you some context on that, vis-a-vis the 2 organisations I've already referenced, USA Rugby's rough revenue breakdown in a typical year, not this year, we won't want to take that as a baseline, but in a typical year would be about 40% from what I would call programs, which in USA Rugby is primarily membership, promoting people to play the game, and people that play the game, participate in rugby, pay a fee to USA Rugby, whether they be a coach, a referee, or a player at different levels. So that's about 40% of USA Rugby's budget. There's another roughly 20% of USA Rugby's budget that comes from grants, and those grants are largely restricted to fund rugby programs, primarily high performance programs, but also a bit of coach education and game development. Only about 15% of the budget would be from sponsorship, which is my area. Another 15% roughly from events, which for USA Rugby, the lion's share of that is actually international rugby events. For my previous role, it would have been fundraising events and programmatic events for which we would be asking either participants or partners to contribute some funding towards. And then there's about 10% at USA Rugby from philanthropy, primarily, if you like, donations. And if you flip that on its head, Play Rugby USA was a very small community program when it started out, with 75 kids sort of in a public park in New York City, grew over a number of years to serve thousands of kids across 3 cities, primarily in the school system, through the school system. But if you took the average budget of Play Rugby, about 30% of that would have been from donations, about 30% from programs. So we would have charged fees to either schools or youth organisations, and to a small percentage of some of the parents. 25% was from events and 15% from grants. Now, if you average out all of those pieces, probably 35% of that overall funding came from corporations, but the rest was either from funding institutions or from individuals. So just to provide perspective on that, and that's why today we will be focusing on both sponsorship, but also fundraising from an events and campaigns perspective. So the items 1 through 3 is what we'll be talking about today. If anyone has questions on the other things, happy to take them. So what I've tried to do is just distill down from the experience I've had sort of at the grassroots level as well as at the national governing body level. While some of the approaches and some of the things we can offer are different, there's no way Play Rugby USA we would have a backdrop like this for one of our kids tournaments playing flag rugby, for example. The best practice is still the same, and so are the reasons why an organisation might support us, and even the same for why a person individually might support us, whether it be sponsorship or whether it be a donation or even maybe a grant. So the first thing is this belief and purpose. Purpose being sort of why you do what you do, what drives what you're doing, what you're passionate about, and how do you bring that to reality through your rugby program. And to engage somebody, you need them to believe in that. They have to share that similar belief to you. So finding individuals in organisations, or finding individuals representing themselves that have a belief, a similar belief to you, in the value that rugby can bring to the community, or the value that rugby can bring to kids, or why you're specifically running your rugby program, is the first thing. The second thing is, as we all know, rugby's pretty fun. And so we want to engage people in that experience, make sure that they have the opportunity to have fun through engaging with you, whether as a donor or a sponsor. The third part is, because for most of us, even if we get a company to sponsor us, and this is even the same to a certain extent at the USA rugby level, but it's 100% was the reason at the play rugby level, that the individual or that organisation wants to know that the support, the financial support that they are providing is going to make a difference. So they need to understand what impact your program is having. How is it making a difference on that community? How is it benefiting those young people that are participating in that program? At the USA rugby level, it might be more about how are we helping young people realise their potential at the high performance level, getting the opportunity to represent their country. It might be about how are we empowering and helping more women leaders to be at the top level of their game and have more leadership roles within rugby, more coaching roles within rugby. All of these things make a difference, and you need to find the things that you can offer that align with something that individual or company is looking to do. And then slightly related to this, they're going to be looking for some form of return. There's two primary types of return. There's literally a return on investment, which is the company donates $10,000 and they need to be able to show that somehow that $10,000 is going to generate $40,000 worth of business for them. Or more likely, on the sort of club community level, they want to see that there's some form of positive return. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have some sort of highly complex monitoring and evaluation system and structure in place, but even just having some surveys, some data to back up what people can probably already see, which is rugby's a really good thing for this community. So how can we just measure that? And we can only prove what we can prove. So just measure what you can measure to demonstrate that this support they're providing is going to have some form of impact. Lots of youth programs have that in terms of sponsor a child to play in the program, for example. So that's why they might be interested in getting involved. I think the other part of this is then how simply should we engage them. So the beliefs part, making it fun, and all those things we just talked about, what should inspire them to want to support. But that's just step one. Step two is how do we engage them in the process? So at Play Rugby, if somebody wrote us a $10,000 check, that wasn't engaging. I mean, yes, we took the check to the bank, but that wasn't engaging that person. We needed to thank that person. We needed to recognize that person if they wanted to be recognized. If it was a company, we would most likely have that company's logo somewhere on our website, or at a particular event, we might have somebody come up on stage and actually speak on behalf of their employees as to why they were supporting us and the impact that they were hoping that that support would provide. So really engage with that person or that company. And then ultimately, the act component is to deliver what you need to deliver so that you can achieve your objectives and they can achieve their objectives. And we're going to get to that bit on the next slide. There's a simple model, you can look it up online, around purpose, called Ikigai. It's a Japanese model that's meant to be kind of reason for existing. And you can adapt this actually to the last two slides as to when you're thinking about how can we raise funds, you can take that model and adapt it. And there's four primary pieces to it. And you can literally just Google this. The first thing is like, what do you love? What are you passionate about? The second thing is, what are you really good at? The third thing in this instance would be, what would somebody pay you for? And the fourth thing is, how does that make a difference? So what impact does it have? How does it align with your mission? Now, the more circles you can get intersected, the more effective that sponsorship and that funding partnership will be. So feel free to look that up, but it's a nice simple way of just distilling down some things that can be quite complicated. So this framework is again, super simple, because that's how I like to operate, so I understand the things I'm talking about. And this is just a framework that I used at Play Rugby. I've used Beta Sports Partners. I've used it at USA Rugby, and it's just meant to tackle the 4 key things you need to have a successful partnership. And this could be any type of partnership, not just a fundraising partnership. And then in the middle, the things you need to do once it's active to keep it active, keep improving it, and moving it forward, which in sponsorship terms is called fulfillment. In a regular partnership, I just call it the backbone of the partnership. So these ones I've unpacked a little bit in the back of the presentation. There's some links to a couple of LinkedIn articles. This is one of the LinkedIn articles, so you can literally just go there and pull off all the details, so I don't need to read through all of the details with you today. But the objectives are obviously shared objectives. So what is that company looking to achieve? What are you looking to achieve? And where is there some form of intersection? How could you help them achieve their objectives? And this is always the first thing you have to think about from a sponsorship perspective. You might have the best rugby program in the country. You might have the most kids involved in the country. You might have the most diverse program in the country. To which I would pat you on the back and at the same time say, so what? Because the so what is what you need to answer for a company. So from the company's lens, you need to look at these things always from their objectives backwards, and how can you help them? Once you've got some idea of how you could do that, then you look at what I call the fit. So just simply, what's that company's vision? Do they have a purpose statement? Or if not, what's their mission statement? Does that align? 90% of companies, I think you'll find their values and to a certain extent their mission statements somehow align with rugby because of the positivity and the values of rugby. But their principles, the behaviours they make, however they define their culture and the different things that they focus on. So this is literally just doing some research on the company. If you think you can help them in some way achieve their objectives and they meet, there's some good synergy in this fit, then you would move forward to the third piece, which is, all right, well, what can you contribute to them? What can you provide them to help them achieve their objectives? And what in return would you be asking them to provide you? And that some of the questions have been around cash versus other forms of support, value in kind. So we'll cover some of that off a little further down the line. And then the last piece, which is, I think, one of the primary reasons in my view that partnerships don't work, is you check the first box, you check the second box, you check the third box, and you enter into a partnership. But what you haven't done is very clearly defined up front, what value should that company be expecting in return? How are you actually going to deliver that with them, develop it and deliver it with them? So developing it's just coming up with the 3 or 4 things that they might want, the programs or experiences that they might want, and then obviously you actually have to execute on those and actually deliver those things. But likewise in return, there's no point getting $100,000 of support and having to spend $90,000 of it just to manage the partnership, which you'd call a fulfillment or an activation cost. So thinking about the value at the beginning of the conversation and then designing it into the partnership so that you can very clearly deliver it enables you then to do this middle piece, the fulfillment piece, where you're aligned around what you're trying to achieve. You're always able to easily assess it, and then you can adapt and improve as you go along. Now, this is the other tricky part, right? Because especially at the grassroots level, we have to be realistic, specifically when we're talking about sponsorship, as to what actually can we offer, right? Even at the USA Rugby level, we don't have a massive, big, long list of things that we can offer that have true commercial value. We have the slot on the front and back of jerseys. So you've got EY there on the front and UL on the back. We have field boards we can provide. These are the rights. These are the physical things that we can provide that help drive some form of brand value for that company. And we have digital versions of those through the website, through social media, etc., etc. So those would be rights. They provide, if you like, core brand value back to that particular company. The first part, the intellectual property, is incredibly hard, and at the club level, it's it's not really even something you'd ever want to try and measure. It's essentially just a goodwill, and in the more sophisticated sponsorships at the World Rugby level, there is a value on engaging with World Rugby, which is very formulaic and has all sorts of metrics behind it. And it essentially says that if you're investing in this particular property with World Rugby, this is the value of the intellectual property. Here are the actual specific things we can give you, the rights, and here's some benefits we can give you. Benefits are things that the company would otherwise have to pay for. Tickets to a game, maybe a hospitality area, some sort of meet and greet with the players, those sorts of experiences that you can design. But the important part here, when you're thinking about what you have to offer, is to really understand what is that company actually looking for. Generally, you'll find from a sponsorship perspective, companies are looking for three things, not necessarily all three, but any of these three things. First is brand awareness. So by affiliating with you, by association with you, they are increasing the awareness of their brand. And the next layer of that might be actually brand affinity, where people are actually looking at that brand in a positive light because of its association with rugby and because of its association with you. So brand awareness would be the first thing. The second is around client or customer experience, especially important in the business to business space. So for both EY and UL, that's very important. They want to engage some of their big clients around the world around this rugby experience and give them an amazing experience watching a Rugby Sevens event where they can spend 1 or 2 days with their clients with this crazy game going on in the background that a lot of their clients may not have seen, but then are really kind of inspired by. So client experience is really important. And the third is employee engagement. Also was very important piece of EY's sponsorship with USA Rugby, as in getting their employees engaged at all different levels in that sponsorship. We had a very big, long, detailed program we were meant to be executing with them this year around that. And of course, that came to a bit of a screeching halt with COVID because we weren't able to do that. But those three things are things to always bear in mind when we're talking about what the objectives of the company. They nearly always will fit into those three primary buckets. And at the club level, in addition to all the way up to national governing body level as well, you can also think about it with a philanthropic lens on that company. So what are they doing in terms of CSR, corporate social responsibility? How are they engaging their employees in different causes? Do they have volunteering programs? Do they have matching programs? What are those sorts of things that those companies are doing? All of those things you'll find in big companies online. They have reports, social impact reports and CSR reports and other sorts of reports where you can see these things, because most companies will have some form of DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, or DIE, but DEI usually diversity, equity, inclusion initiative going on. Some companies are very, very genuine about it, and other companies are starting to have to get genuine about it. Some will have very specific gender equity initiatives going on. Others will have wellness initiatives going on for their employees. So all of these things are kind of relevant for rugby and important to know. So not just always looking at the commercial lens, but looking at what are the things they're trying to do to improve their company and engage their employees and help their employees be the best version of themselves. So these are some examples of in those three areas that we just went through, different things you might be able to offer. And again, these are kind of at the, if you like, the USA rugby level. At the grassroots level, at the Play Rugby USA kind of level, lots of it is around the benefits that you can provide. Really engaging with their employees is often the biggest thing, and that they get some form of positive brand identity from partnering with you, but usually because they're already involved in some form of other bigger related partnership. AIG would have been an example of that, supporting Play Rugby USA, because they had a partnership with the All Blacks, a partnership with USA Rugby, and Play Rugby USA wasn't there to try and provide, you know, millions of eyeballs on their brand. Play Rugby USA was there to provide some form of, well, answer the question, why rugby, to the AIG employees in New York City, many of whom hadn't got a clue about rugby. And they're like, why is our company supporting the All Blacks? by getting involved with Play Rugby and us coaching their kids and getting their employees out and doing some team building stuff and branding them at our gala and branding them at our rugby cup, where they actually got to come and see and hear from the kids, they got it. They're like, wow, this sport is unbelievable, and we can see it on our doorstep. And now we get why AIG has sent us all an All Blacks jersey with AIG on it. So it's unusual for AIG to have done something like that if they hadn't had those other things in place. So that's the sponsorship side of things. And I'll just quickly run through an example of a fundraising event or a fundraising campaign. Now, when you look at these, what I call the 9 nuggets, there's 3 sets of 3. These things can be applied to a campaign or applied to an event. So when you're thinking about raising money through a campaign, which would be to engage a specific group of donors to support a specific initiative, make like a fun run, for example, these would be relevant, as they would be relevant if you're hosting events. So firstly, always purpose why you're doing it. But the other part, when you're thinking about participants, it's not just the people you're trying to get to actually commit, to donate and support, but actually the other people that can influence those people to do it. So one of the most effective techniques for fundraising at the grassroots level is peer-to-peer fundraising, which is why so many non-profits want their board members, 100% of their board, to be donating to that organization. Because if the board members are donating, it's easier for them to have a conversation with someone else and say, look, I'm supporting this and this is why, and I think that your impact could be this, and we'd love to get you involved. And because it's a donor-to-donor conversation, it actually has more weight than if it's a company to or a cause-to-donor conversation. But think about, for events and campaigns, setting up a committee of people that can add value to that. Do they have connections? Are they influencers? Are they big on social media? Are they somebody that can come along and bring a bunch of people to the event? And always for an event, think about an honoree, somebody that you can recognize at the event. And the typical non-profit way to do that would be to pick somebody in business that has some form of authentic overlap with what you do, and to have them come and speak and give a keynote address. But obviously, you're also asking them, can your company please support this initiative? And can you also buy a bunch of tables or buy a bunch of tickets? So those 2 things would be really important, but then also thinking about who else can support the event outside of just individuals. So people can provide catering or can provide gifts, provide auction items, those sorts of things. Then obviously you've got to plan it. So once you've got the first 2 things sorted, think about what your objective is and then work backwards with a bit of an action plan. Just from a very functional perspective, you need these 3 things. Won't go into details on those, but just to think about specifically the last one now, technology, because a lot of fundraising events have become hybrid, physical and digital, or just completely virtual events. And the technology does enable that to happen really, really well now. But even for a physical event, the technology will enable you to really engage the audience, to set up a campaign where people are literally clicking on their phones and donating and their names flashing up on the screens. All of those sorts of things are quite affordable in relative terms now, and add a lot of engagement to the event, but also specifically enable you to get to your fundraising goal. And I'll happily talk to some examples of that when we get to the Q&A. And then the last 3 parts on the fundraising event are really important, and this is important for campaigns as well, which is experiential. If we come back to that initial model, the inspire, engage and act, inspiring people, providing them with this sort of view of the future that's so much better, some hope, but it's relevant to them, it's something that they care about, but then really engaging them in it. So if it's a fundraising event, it needs to be fun. They need to hear from the beneficiaries of your rugby program or your rugby community. They want to be able to meet and greet and interact with people and have fun with your board or other people that are involved, players, coaches involved in your program. But at the end of the day, do not forget to drive action. It's great to bring together 200 people into a room and they have a brilliant time and maybe everyone buys a ticket for $100. But if your objective is to raise 100 grand, you've not managed it, because you need to make sure you ask people to donate and ask people to support. And the way to do that obviously is to be very clear about it and tell people you're going to be doing it, and then actually to do it, make it easy for them to donate, and ensure that the event is designed with that fundraising goal in mind. There's other types of fundraising events which should be called cultivation events, where it's more about just bringing people together to get them aware of the experience and aware of the charity and aware of your club and the impact that it's having. And then you would follow up with them to try to fundraise after the event or invite them to a fundraising event. But here we're talking about fundraising events, and it's about raising money, so don't forget to ask. I've given a few examples here of different campaigns and events. From really global level ones, I'm not going to run through all of these, I'm just going to pick out a couple and then go to questions. So the global level stuff, the P&G campaigns that I'm sure everybody's seen, the Like a Girl campaign and the Olympic campaign they did, Thank You Mum, were brilliant. Super inspirational and really amazing at engaging their customer base and in ultimately driving value to their Olympic sponsorship. Now, those aren't sorts of things we can do at that level to drive the same value, but what we can do from that is take away the fact that they picked on a topic that everybody had an experience with, or that their target demographic all had an experience with, and they made it really super inspiring and engaging for people. We can all do that. I've been to a couple of virtual wine tastings now. Have a think about that type of thing, given that the rugby audience often likes to have a sip of wine. If not, you maybe could do a beer tasting. But that's been super successful for Play Rugby. They've done a couple of those different things, virtual galas, and now there's even a whole thing on the non-gala gala, which is getting a bunch of people together online, or literally just reaching out to them, asking them to support, but not having to spend the money on a ticket, and you have them spend thousands of dollars on a venue to engage them. So bunch of different examples here, but I think the best thing for us to do here to make it real for everybody is to answer some of the questions. So Brian, how did you want to do that in terms of the questions? Do you want me to answer some of the ones I've received, and then you read off some others?
Yeah, so first off, thank you for the presentation. That was great. There was a lot of really good information in there. And for everyone, I've seen a couple messages in the chat. People would like to see this presentation afterwards. So don't worry, I'll send the presentation out to everyone tomorrow with the recording from tonight, so you can watch it and look at it tomorrow. So everyone, once again, reminder, if you have a question, type it out in the chat. I sent you over some of the questions, Mark, that people sent to me by email beforehand. So if you want to get into it right away, if you've looked at those questions and want to answer it, sure, be my guest.
I haven't, and for some of the others, well, for all of these that I answer, I'll just ask Jen to chime in as well, because Jen's had a ton of experience in this exact space, and specifically at the moment, obviously in the girls rugby space, and I think so. Jen's insights will be equally valuable, but. So I've got 3 questions here. The first one was from Kathy Daniel from Barbados Rugby, which was about how to convince potential donors and sponsors that rugby is worth the investment. And there's another question from someone else further on that's pretty similar. And the answer to that is to look at it from the lens of the person or the organisation that you're seeking to engage with. That's the answer to the question. Because you have to understand what's important to them. What is it that they care about? What do they believe in? If it's a company, well, or an individual, what do they currently support? And is there any way you can find out why they support that particular thing? And then you answer the question, well, can we, as a rugby community, as a club, can we as a sport, but also the organisation I represent, are we capable of actually delivering something that they care about and that they're already supporting, and maybe doing it in a slightly different way, but we genuinely think it would offer some value to them? And if you're really confident in that, and you're thinking about it from their perspective, that's how you're going to have have the most impact. And the example I would give on that is when I first started Play Rugby USA, and I quit a banking job and threw myself into this sort of tiny little charity full time, and say full time, but without pay for a couple of years. And we started as a community program, but realised that the only way we were really going to provide impact was to take the game to where the kids were, and the kids were in schools, and specifically after school programs was the sweet spot in New York City that we needed to get the game into. And there was no point me going to a school and saying, hey, do you want a rugby program? Because they literally had never heard of rugby. They didn't know how to spell it. They did not know what it was. And I could chime on about rugby values and all these things, but what we needed to do is look at it from the lens of an educator. Well, what does an educator want to do? What do they care about? How are they measured? How's their success measured? What are they here to achieve with these young people? Now, how many of those things can we genuinely offer them through a rugby program? And of course, the answer was lots of those things. Now, I couldn't prove any of it. I just had to sell it in a very authentic way based upon what my own experience and the experience of other people, and just being very genuine and passionate about the fact that I knew we had something very different that could have a significant impact that was 100% aligned with what they needed to achieve to be successful. And that's how we got Play Rugby into the first 5 schools, and it grew to over 400 schools off the back of that over the following years. So the next question from Kathy was about how to connect with the right people in the organisations, the one with the purse strings, the one that makes the decisions, so on and so forth. And obviously it's a pretty hard question to answer because it does very much depend on the company and so on and so forth. But what I would distill it down to is find a rugby champion. And the rugby champion, ideally, somebody in the organisation that has some form of affinity to rugby. I can tell you, I can't think of one global rugby sponsorship at the high level, at USA Rugby level, the RFU, you name it. I can't think of anyone that doesn't have a senior executive that's a rugby fan and that championed that particular sponsorship. So without that, it's pretty much a non-starter. But if you can't find a rugby champion directly in the organisation, go to who you know, friends and family, people in the rugby community. Most people work somewhere. Who do they know there? Is there somebody that supports sports or supports other causes or supports kids programs? And could you get a conversation with them? Obviously, technology is great. LinkedIn, Kathy, I did a very quick search in LinkedIn. There's 86 people in Barbados with rugby somewhere in their profile. You'll be pleased to know that you're one of them. And we have 2 shared connections. So just using things like LinkedIn, obviously just as a starting point. Now I would guess, Kathy, you probably already know a lot of those 86 people, but maybe not. And maybe there's some of them that work in a company that you haven't thought of yet. And then that's approaching it individual first. The other way is to approach it organisation first, where it's actually a much more, there's 2 tiers of thought on this. One is you go to all the websites, the World Rugby website, the International Olympic Committee website, all the professional leagues around the world, and you literally just distill down into a spreadsheet all of the companies that sponsor rugby, and you work out which ones of them have offices in your area. Now, if you're a rugby club, they need to have an office in your city or your suburb. If you're in Barbados, then they need to have an international office in Barbados if they're a US company. That's a start, right? Doesn't mean that company is necessarily going to support you at that level. But to use that AIG example, that was exactly why AIG supported Play Rugby in New York City, because it was their headquarters, but they weren't doing anything in New York City to show that they were supporting rugby, and so it became relevant. And then the third question for Kathy was about cash support versus other forms of support, and are there other things that you can obtain as a union or even a club that are valuable to you? And of course, the answer to that question is, we'll create a list of what you need. And there's 2 types of value in kind support. There's what I would call core support, and then there's what I would call program support. Core support, if you're USA Rugby, for example, would be airlines. If we could get an airline to credit us all of our flights in a typical year, probably save us about $1 million. Right, so that's a massive number for a union that has to fly people in from all over the world, fly people across the country just to get together to practice, let alone going to tournaments and international matches. Insurance would be another hard cost. But at the grassroots level as well, like a rugby club, if you have to file a non-profit tax return or tax return, you probably have to pay an accountant to do that. So is there a small accountancy firm that can do that for you for free, and you can thank them on the website and have them come to a dinner or something, end of season dinner, recognise them on the pitch at the end of a match. Like, there's lots of different things you could do. Sorry, I'm just checking my. Yeah, he's okay. Sorry, I had a bit of choking going on in the background. So core support would be those sorts of things, and program support would be the things that people need to play and perform. So kit, right, rugby jerseys, training kit, etc. Hydration and nutrition type of things, down to tape. You know, companies like KT Tape and other companies that might be able to donate tape, physiotherapy companies that might be able to donate physiotherapists to help be trainers and things on the side of the field. So yeah, start with a list of what you need, and then you do the same thing you would have done in the phase one, which is find the people, find the companies that fit. There's definitely some physios in Barbados, for example, that have rugby in their profile, and if you're not already connected with them, then you absolutely should be. The second question was from Camilo Falcon in Mexico, and he's starting up a youth program, Mexico City, which is super exciting. I'd love to learn more about that. So thanks for doing that. And you're looking to get kids to participate in public spaces and public fields. And it sounds like you've got some kids and parents, and you've also got some people to coach and referee and volunteer their time, as so many rugby people do, to support that. But you're saying, well, how could we really need a sponsor to cover the balls and the belts and the cones and the t-shirts and hydration and those sorts of things. So the first thing I would say, and I'm sure you're already thinking of this, is a sponsor or a series of sponsors is one great solution for that, but there are others as well. So just think about who you know, think about your rugby family, think about their connections, think about where they work. Is there a kick-off event that you could do to bring all those people together and ask them to provide some form of funding support that raises money to kick off the first season, but also gives you the opportunity to tell some inspirational rugby stories, and maybe get a couple of kids that have already participated in a rugby program to talk about their experiences. So think about fundraising events, think about people you might be able to engage to support a player for the first season. If it costs $50 for a player to play for a whole season, which gives them the kit and the time and the field time and all the rest of it. Are there enough people that you know that you could ask them and say, look, hey, you know how much rugby's meant to me and the impact it's had on my life and my family's life, and could you support one child in this program for $50? That's how Play Rugby started. I know Jen's literally doing a campaign on that today for Girls Rugby, for Giving Tuesday here, for $95 to support a girl in their program. And Play Rugby started with I would call it a social experiment, in that I had a group of homeless young people. I had a group of people, 3 groups of young people that were from 3 different institutions in New York. So a homeless one and a couple of other sort of childcare facilities. And I had a group of colleagues at the time I worked at a bank. So I had a bunch of people at a complete other end of the social spectrum who had kids. And I had people from my rugby club, including these old boys that I'd got to know through the rugby club, who a bunch of successful business people. I said to the group of people from the organisations, bring the kids. It won't cost them a penny. They'll get a t-shirt. In fact, they got jerseys, pretty hardcore, but proper rugby jerseys. For a whole season, and we'll coach them, and they're going to have an amazing time, and they're going to learn these things. If you can just, organisation, commit to bring them here, please, for these 2 hours once a week. To my banking friends, it's like, hey guys, you know me, bring your kids along, they'll have a blast. And by the way, it costs a couple $100 for the season, and 100 of that's going to support one of these children being able to participate. And I went to my old boys in the rugby club who'd seen me play on the field and, work hard for the club, and said, guys, think about what rugby's done for you and your life, and what an amazing community you have in our club. would you make a donation to help us kick this program off? And I think I got 8 people to donate $1,000, which is a decent amount of money. And I believe after that first year, we'd raised $30,000, which was enough to cover all the costs of the program and to put a bit of money in the bank so that I could then engage somebody a year later to start promoting the program in schools. And we didn't have a sponsor. We even paid for our kit. We got it at wholesale rate, but we'd still paid for it. But obviously, if you are looking to get a sponsor, you loop back to the thing that I just did for the first part of to Kathy's question. And Camilla, you just again on LinkedIn, you got 450 people with rugby in their profile in Mexico City. So you've got a busy few weeks ahead reaching out to them. And then Lena Norman from Athenians Rugby, which sounds awesome. I'd love to visit your program. You have a youth program in Greece, which sounds awesome. And your question was about, well, actually the same, about getting to, how do you get to the person who controls the expenditure? So I'd loop back to what I said earlier, but I'd also just make a differentiation, obviously, between, you know, big companies and small companies, right? So in small companies, it's most likely going to be the owner or one of the senior people at the small company that has some form of discretion within their budget. And ideally, a rugby person in a small company, or a rugby person that can introduce you to someone they know really well, who can speak very confidently about the impact that your program's having and the opportunity it's providing to those young people that you're supporting, is a key. In the big companies, it really is very much down to research online and and maybe even calling anyone who you can, or connecting with anyone you can on LinkedIn, and just asking very openly for some advice, because they're complicated. And it could be somebody in marketing, it could be somebody in HR, it could be somebody in employee wellness or employee engagement. They might have even a CSR, corporate social responsibility department. Or the simplest thing to do is to find somebody senior in a business unit that's been involved with rugby, because usually they have discretion to some of the bigger companies that we did stuff with at Play Rugby. People could write $5,000 or even $10,000 checks on behalf of the company, but for their department, as long as we were engaging their employees in some form of activity, and didn't need to go beyond that one person making the decision. So I think and then Lena, your other 2 questions were very similar to the first ones about what the value in rugby and how we promote that. So that's those. What else? Oh, Jen.
Well said.
Jen, fill in all the gaps, Jen.
You didn't leave many gaps to fill in there, Mark, I must say. That was comprehensive. I think just a couple of things, just kind of reading through some of the comments and questions that are coming in now, is maybe to address kind of some of the things that we can do now, today, right? Like we're living in a weird time. There's not a lot of rugby happening. So what are some of the things that we can do now to be prepared as we go forward? And so, a couple of things that I was thinking about was, have you, all of the things you talked about with understanding who you are, what your purpose is, what's your why. That's where I would start, right? Is creating marketing materials, or creating your deck, or creating whatever communication you're going to use. Even if it's your email, how are you going to communicate in an email so that you have a consistent message? But start to put together those messages now. If the people out there haven't heard of Canva, it is my absolute favorite space to create things in. It's super easy to use, and you can create a really professional looking deck that you can talk to people and tell people about your who, what, why, where, why is it important, what rugby is, how it makes a difference, why it's important, why it matters. And it's also a time where you can start doing research. There's a lot of questions about, I'm struggling to see how this applies to my, how does it apply to my club, right? So a couple of those questions have come in. How does it apply to my club? So one is being prepared. And then 2 is, okay, if I'm a small club and I'm not a large union, who are the people in my local community? And I think that really depends on who your target market is. So if I'm an adult club, I might be more prone to go after the bars and restaurants and whomever in that community that might want exposure and access to your community, right? Maybe, whatever that might be. Bars might be a bad example in some places, good example in other places. Certainly for girls rugby, that's not a space that we're going into. So really taking some time to think about who are the types of companies that will resonate with what it is that we're trying to accomplish. But if you don't know what it is that you're trying to accomplish first, you're never going to be successful in figuring out who your donors and sponsors should be, right? So it's figuring out those pieces first. And then just kind of sharing a couple of things people were asking about, like kind of at a little bit of a smaller level. Mark, you mentioned girls rugby we did a Giving Tuesday ask. And we know 2020 has been a challenging year for our community. And we want to make sure that any girl who wants to participate has the opportunity to do so. And so we did an ask, $95 per girl, right? So that's what our cost is for them to participate, and asked for scholarship dollars. And it was a really successful campaign for us, which was fantastic. And then we did a really simple holiday exclusive. And I've seen a couple of other of the adult clubs do this. If you've got a logo and you've got product, stick it on something, figure out how you're going to have it manufactured. And we did a very simple 4 weeks. We did a holiday exclusive in 4 weeks, and we raised almost $1,000. And maybe that's not a lot of money in the big scheme of things when you're talking about the dollars that you're looking at. But for a smaller club or a grassroots organization, that's a big chunk of change that can do a whole lot of good, and they can figure out how to use those funds. So just a couple of things that what we can do now, right, is just being prepared, identifying those things. And I guess the other thing I would say is figure out where your revenue streams are. This is all about how do we generate revenue in our program. So who are your potential donors? Who are your potential sponsors? Are we going to host an event? Are there grants out there that are applicable to us? There was a question about grants and whether or not clubs actually get grants. And that's a really good question, because I don't have as much experience in there as I do from an organizational standpoint. And it's absolutely a space that we live in. But you, again, have to know what's your why, what's your purpose, and identify grants that are looking to fund those organizations who align with that message and purpose and your why. So I definitely think it's a space that we live in for girls rugby. I don't know if it's as beneficial. Maybe you guys could talk to that at the club level. There's just a couple of things there.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That's super helpful. And and I didn't have the question when I was answering the others, so I've just had a quick scroll through as well. So yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think there's a couple of questions about whether or how we should compete against other sports, and is there $1 to rugby better than $1 to something else? I think you've got to ask you why you're looking at that comparison, because the only reason to look at that comparison is if genuinely you feel that the only way you're going to get $1 is if you have to prove that equation. It's a very, very hard thing to prove, and it can upset a lot of people along the way. At Play Rugby USA, one of the obvious questions everyone used to ask us was, well, what's the rugby season? And we said, well, for us in our program, it's year round. So we literally played every season, and we were indoors in tiny little gyms in the winter. And part of the reason for that was, one, because we wanted to reach as many young people as possible, so that a young person that had to be committed to basketball and wasn't able to play rugby in the winter would be able to play in the spring, and vice versa with a young person playing soccer, so on and so forth. So by making our program year round, we said we compete with everything and we compete with nothing. And so we didn't have to compete, and we didn't have to try to make that direct comparison. We were able to show through the impact we were having on the young people that actually rugby justified its own support alongside sports programs or arts programs, music programs, etc. So I think the only reason to answer that question is if you feel you absolutely have to. The main thing is showing how your particular program can generate some form of value to the person you're asking to support. And if it's a donor, that value is literally showing them the benefit that your organisation is delivering. And that links into the grant question. Yeah, look, there's not grants out there just for rugby clubs generally, I don't think. Grants tend to be cause-based. They tend to be based on the mission of a foundation. Now, there are family foundations that have sometimes more discretion, and some corporate foundations have dollar discretion where they can just give to charities based on an employee making a recommendation. So if you're a club that's a non-profit organisation, there is possibly a way of getting a small grant from a company through most likely somebody that plays on your club and works in a company that has a program like that. So again, it just comes back to Jen's point of being prepared, but starting with who do you know, and having those conversations with the people you know, because everybody knows somebody, and that's by far the most efficient way to do it. If you're running a youth program, there may well be some form of grants based maybe on wellness and physical activity. Nike has a program like that, for example, with $5,000 grants. There are other organisations that will support you if you're supporting a particular demographic of young people that may be from an underserved population, and that you're able to provide them an opportunity that otherwise they wouldn't be afforded, and that might be a grant. But for adult rugby clubs, obviously, it'd be much more specific to the previous point. And then these are, yeah, there's a couple on the competing with the other sports, and look, I think that we're obviously used to that in the USA, big time, with all of the other sports, and I think that the issue is that there's a perception that you have to compete, and I think, like, we felt at Play Rugby, we were always competing with soccer for fields, because youth soccer was so successful, and that they had all these public-private partnerships with the city, so they had all these fields and all the access to fields, and so we didn't have access to fields, so we're like, all right, well, fine, we're going to run rugby in playgrounds and gyms, and then we only need fields for competitions, so we'll just run competitions 3 times a season. So you just have to adapt to what's around you, and work within that, and then again prove that value through what you're delivering, and use all of the people that have supported you and the people that are participating in what you're doing to become champions of your cause, and how you're looking to raise additional funds. And then I just want to see if COVID, yeah, what impact do we think COVID is going to have on the sponsorship space, and then how it might affect community clubs? I mean, absolutely 100%. Marketing budgets in lots of big companies have been absolutely slashed, and some companies obviously aren't even around anymore. Massive companies. One of our sponsors from last year, J Crew, they went into Chapter 11, which doesn't mean they're not around anymore, because we went into Chapter 11 as well. But the point is, there was no way we were going to get a renewal of that partnership while they were in Chapter 11, right? So it's undoubtedly had a huge impact, and I think, like anything, it requires some creativity and agility to be able to overcome that, and that's where, as rugby players, I think generally we have to apply what we do on the field to off the field. Like, we're brilliant at finding space and not always running headfirst into people, which is something I used to do too often, but trying to find space, trying to react to what you see and play what you see, and be dynamic and make dynamic decisions and support each other with that. We're not so good at it off the field. We're always like, oh, there's all the other sports in the way, and now there's no marketing dollars because of COVID. All right, you can't control those things. So what can you control? And all you can control is the quality of program, the quality of your relationships, what you're asking of people, and why you're asking them, and always positioning it from their perspective. And that's why I think you always just have to come back to distilling it to those simple things. And the fact is that even though sponsorship budgets have been slashed, there's bound to be somebody that's involved in your rugby club in some way, shape or form, whose company has probably done quite well out of COVID. It might be a technology company or a food delivery service or something that supported the local community. And maybe they're in a position to support, and maybe by supporting and showing that they're really invested in their community, that might support their business even more. And so you just have to look at it from a different lens. Look at it through a lens that you would on the field when you've got a wall of defenders in front of you. And instead of saying, well, I'm just going to throw the ball up in the air or run backwards, You don't, do you? You go forwards and you find a way to make it work. And I know that's a bit generic, but I think sometimes we forget that we've actually got these skills in here that we need to reapply off the field sometimes.
And I think, Mark, just to add on to that, I think the other thing we've talked a lot about, and you've hit on it a lot, which I think is just right on the money, which is it's all about having that mutual understanding of each other, right? And I think there's a misconception in all areas, this isn't rugby specific, that you go and you ask somebody for money and that's it. But it's really all about the relationship building. So I think there's a statistic out there, and I don't know, it's something like it takes 7 touches before somebody will actually fund you or give you money or what have you. And so truly it's about building those relationships and getting to know who a company is and helping them to know who you are as a team, as a club, as an organization, as a grassroots movement, as an adult club, whatever it is, helping them see who you are and why it's important. But it takes time to develop those relationships. And so you know, I think it's identifying who those people are that, you know, being prepared as we talked about, but not expecting to be able to go in and make an ask in the first meeting, right? So sometimes it takes, you know, 3 or 4 times before you can even let them know why you really are there and what it is that you're looking for, because you have to get to know each other and figure out what's important. So it's really putting in the effort to establish those relationships so that ultimately, you know, something fruitful comes out of it that's beneficial for both parties. It's not just about going and asking somebody for money and taking the money and walking away. It's really, how do we build this mutually beneficial, productive, and supportive relationship? And as we know, relationships take time, and in this space, that's not any different. So I think that's important. And the other thing I would say too is, and this is something I'm guilty of, I don't love to fundraise and to ask for money. And I don't know a ton of people who do love to be in that space, but what I have learned is you get 100%, like you don't ask the question, you get 100% of nothing, right? So going out and asking and being brave enough to say, okay, I've done my homework, I am prepared, I have my marketing materials, I'm gonna go, I believe in what I'm doing, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ask. And I'm gonna have a conversation, I'm gonna get to know somebody and figure out if it's a good fit. But if we don't ever take that first step, then we'll never get anywhere. We won't see those dollars come in to fund our programs that we care so much about.
Yeah, and the follow up to that, and it is, again, it's all relationship based. I'll just give some examples from my rugby club that I played with for a number of years in New York City, called Old Blue. Not to say that this applies to every single club. You won't be able to do all of these things, but the reality is every club can fundraise, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of clubs aren't very good at it as well. And I think it's partly because we have this perception in rugby that it's like, you know, it's the game made in heaven, and we shouldn't charge people for it because it's so spectacular and so amazing. That's exactly why we should. It's exactly why people should be funding it. We should be supporting it. And so the first thing to do at the club level, and we've touched on it already, is literally write a list of all the things you need. So what are all the things that cost you money for a start that you need? The team needs kit. You need the field painted. Sorry, the 15-month-old is biting mummy's finger as she's trying to apply teething gel to his teeth. I think she's still got her finger though. That's good. We wouldn't think so. Sorry. So what's a list of all of the things that you need? And that can be, right, as I said, from somebody that literally does your tax return for you, which is a real pain in the backside in America to do your 501c3 tax returns. Having somebody do that for you for free and be an accountancy to do that, that's great, right? That saves you probably $5,000. You need equipment. You need some hydration stuff for the team. You probably like some power bars and those sorts of things for the team. You have transportation costs. You have all these other things. So you write a list of all the things that cost you money, and then you write out a list of all the things that you feel might offer some form of value to somebody that supports you, let's say a company. So you've probably got a spot on the front of the jersey, a spot on the back of the jersey. Probably you're allowed to do something on the arms of the jerseys. So you've got 4 spots right there. You could put somebody on the shorts and so forth. So, and then you've got a list of things you need. So you can go to all the people in your rugby club and say, right, any of you accountants, can anyone do our tax return? Does anyone have a relationship with a transportation company? Does anyone have so on and so forth? And then the same thing, sorry, it's a little noisy here now. And then And then the same thing on the other side, which is, on the other side, if you're asking a company to give you some money, we have to then look at the company first, right? Now, what are they looking to achieve, and how can we help? So literally get a list of all the companies that your rugby players, former alumni, and old boys and old girls and everyone else, where they played, and where they worked, and do that analysis, and firstly get a couple of people on the club to do that work for free, and then you literally start going through those connections and asking those questions. So for Old Blue, one of the regular sponsors on the jersey was a technology foreign exchange company. The guy that ran the company, super successful entrepreneur, not a great rugby player, but one of the most passionate rugby people you ever meet, hired pretty much solely rugby players. And so for him, he wanted to build a company based on rugby players because of the experience rugby had given him and the values that he knew those people had, that he essentially had this recruitment pool through the club, directly through the club, but also just through the broader network of being involved in rugby, that enabled him the opportunity to recruit people for his company. And so he was willing to spend 10, 20 grand a year to be on the front of the jerseys, because it costs a fortune to recruit high quality people. And he was able to get high quality people just through his interactions of being involved with the club. So it's things like that. That was the value to his company. That wouldn't have been the same for McKinsey, right? They're not going to say, well, look at my rugby club. Oh, brilliant. I've got 25 amazing rugby people here that we can recruit for McKinsey. There might be one, but who knows? It's a bit of a long shot, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that club had was a really good network of old boys, alumni, some of whom had gone on to be super successful, and it did a brilliant job at bringing them all together every year, and honouring one of the teams from the past. And the club's been around since 1963, so they've had plenty of years to be able to do this. They honour one team from a particular year, and that team obviously all shows up and gets a couple of tables, and it's brilliant because lots of them haven't seen each other for years. And everyone else comes in. There's 200, 250 people that come to this event every year. Everyone pays something to go. Some of the existing players get it for free. Most of them get a discount, but everyone pays something. And some of the more affluent old boys just buy very expensive tables at that event because they can, and because the community and the experiences and the relationships and memories that they've gotten through that family. And then from a kit perspective, it's very hard unless you know the owner of a kit company for them to just gift you kit, because that's their business, right? So you can't kind of give away everything for free. But if you're a super successful club, or you've got a brilliant youth program, it might make sense for them to do it because of the influencer effect and that brand awareness piece. But at Old Blue, that wasn't necessarily the case. So they just did a deal with a kit company that enabled them to buy kit at a slight discount, but then make a bunch of money back through selling kit through that company's website. And they use that to raise money every year. They did a pre-order sale at the beginning of the season went to everybody, all the old boys and all the players and everybody. And from that order, and from the order that they did again ahead of the holiday season, they pretty much made back what it cost them to buy the kit for their club, because of all the people that bought stuff, and they got a kickback from it. And that partnership was designed in that way. So there's some very, very simple examples at the club level. But it starts with, what do you need? Who do you know? And then connecting the dots. And I just looked to see interpreter here, who I just remembered telling me earlier, please speak slowly. So I'm just now going to apologise for not speaking slowly, although it is a little bit too late.
We've had another question come in from Caroline Meikle or Beckel. Are you there, Caroline? Hello?
I see a raised hand.
Yes, that's what I was assuming that was a question. Nope. Okay.
Right, and I'm not 100% convinced we've answered everybody's exact questions, so, and I do apologise for that. It's partly just the dynamic nature of presenting and reading them a little later on in the conversation here. But I do hope that through what I've been able to provide and Jen's, you know, really practical insights as well, that really can help you get kick-started. To the extent that there are any other burning questions, feel free to submit them here. I will have a flick through, and any I feel that we answered very well, I'll be maybe just send in an email to Brian along with the document as a follow-up.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like don't look like there's any other questions that have come in through the chat. So Mark, Jen, on behalf of Rugby America's North, I just want to say a big thank you to you guys for taking the time out tonight to sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and a whole lot of information. This is a big topic that plays a big role, whether you're a Major League Rugby team, a local club, a provincial or state organization, or a national organization. Revenue is a very important topic, and we've laid out a lot of big and important aspects here tonight. So thank you very much for your time. As Mark has said, if anyone has any questions, you guys have my email. I'm happy to pass it on to Mark, who is quite a busy man, hearing the baby in the background there, but I'm sure he'll be able to answer your questions. If you want to reach out to him, I can connect you guys. So this wraps up our Try and Stop Us forums through the month of November and into early December. So thank you very much for tuning in over the last few weeks, everyone. We really appreciate it, and stay tuned. We will definitely be doing more of these in 2021 and beyond. So thank you very much, everyone. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and we'll see you in 2021 for more of these webinars. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jen. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.